Hello and welcome to anyone who dares witness South Forest talk about his struggles with the resource concept and the struggle to keep factions separate. Now, I guess I want to start where it came with the creation of the game and where I was thinking, how could alchemy or potentially potion making be applied in a card game. And the quickest thing to come up with is the idea of kind of like in most games where you put herbs in the flask and then they become the potions, which is essentially where the concept comes from. And so the idea spawned around from that. And it's like how, and of course when it comes to making potions, you could use potentially various different herbs to make make various different types of potions. And so it allowed to create the idea of putting 3 herbs into the flask and then you make a potion out of it, which has the potential to make, like from the immediate onset, make probably interesting decisions from the start when it comes to the herbs that you're given. And my initial thoughts on how this game was going to work was the fact that you would go over here. Yeah, let's see here. Oh, I know I shuffled them, right? Yeah, I shuffled them. I just happened to draw 3 green herbs. But what would happen is you would draw 3 herbs, and then you would pick one. And then you would put one of those in the flask. And then the other 2 would probably get shuffled back in the deck or discard. But it very quickly came to the idea that this isn't going to work very well because it's very cumbersome to, go draw 3, pick one, put back in there or discard or whatnot because you may potentially lose herbs and whatnot, and it just doesn't work well. Not to mention the fact that when you look at the cards, if you've seen other episodes of on this channel where describe how the game works, is that you do need energy to play cards, and if this is the only way you're getting a resource, it takes a while because if you want to be able to play cards from your hand, you would have to solely focus on dumping all the herbs that you get into your first flask, and then you finally have the energy to play the other cards in your deck. So the first iteration of that idea was definitely very very slow and bad. So let's put this back in here. Shuffle it. So that was the first iteration. And there were definitely, when I was making it at first, there were cards based around, one of the factions, increasing the number so they have the higher likelihood of getting what they need, and whatnot. But of course, I eventually came to the conclusion, even before play testing, I understood that wasn't going to work. And so the next iteration was oh god, I don't even remember what that iteration was, but I think the next important one is probably where I came to now. Well, I think what it was first is that you would draw an herb, and then you immediately just place it in a flask. But it seems very limited and very slow in a sense, because again, it leads to the problem of you can't play the cards in your hand because you're stuck waiting to make it do the alchemize so you actually have energy in your energy pile to play the cards in your hand again. leading to the problem where you can't really do anything. And so now I'm up to my current iteration, which is draw, boop. Now you get draw 2. You get to choose which one will go into a flask and then one into your energy pile. That way there is some level of being able to play the game past, drawing cards for like the first bare minimum 3 turns. And so it leads to that, and it's very interesting because it also leads to that painful choice of, especially like when you're like one faction, right? You may potentially not even draw your faction colors because the original iteration of the deck itself, as well, being let's look over here. Search was essentially there's 6 herbs, 6 different types of herbs, and you had 10 of each in it. So 60 cards, and you had 10 herbs. So you were forced to make decisions off the bat because if you wanted to, like with the recipe cards, let me pull that up real quick. I guess I should have done that. Search. That is an actual herb deck. That all right. I picked the wrong one. Oh, good lord. Let's just move you here. Try again. I apologize. And puff deck. And let's pull out a recipe card. Preferably one of the color. There we go. Okay, so essentially, with the deck, while you're doing this, you really want to play recipe cards because they're the main thing to probably bring you the momentum that you need to get going into winning the game. And for the most part, you always want to play them, even though they're not perfection effect. But sometimes they may just be worth it, depending on the scenario. And so, but the thing is, when you only drawing 1 or 2 herbs every turn, and 10% of your deck, of your herb deck, is the color that you are, and in my idea, in terms of making the game at least for the first set, maybe first 2 sets, potentially try to really limit going across faction, because it's like I kind of want to make the core cards and the core identity of the factions before I really start merging them and potentially branching out in that sense. Because with a 6 faction, that's already going to be more than plenty of cards without crossing them, and I want to avoid that for now. And kind of in a similar vein that Magic the Gathering did. But but even as a single faction, you when I was like playtesting, you just could not get. You were not getting enough of your herb, and if when it comes to most of the cards that I imagine if they're going to be part of your faction, they have to cost that color, like at least like 1 herb in your energy pile of that color in it. And that leads to quite a bit of things that you have to really work around, because I do have the idea of the neutral faction where I was planning to put tech there, but then I'm kind of realizing, that kind of ruins the whole idea of identity in terms of the factions. Because whatever wherever they're weak at, they can go to the neutral to fix it first, instead of like potentially finding cards that seem kind of neutral in building what you're trying to build, and not just tech. Though there may be some level of that, but I don't think I can really get away with that. and the neutral cards can, any color can use it. Any energy can be used to cast, to use those cards to play the cards. And it's like, kind of thinking about it, it's like how you really kind of need those really accessible cards to really, play the game. So, but this requires more play testing. I haven't done much, and I need to do a lot more solo play testing to get really the feel of it. But right now, I definitely want to focus on, having some core identity. And so it's like, how do I solve this problem where, you're not getting enough of the resource? And it's like, my first solution was to go down and uh, I go to herb deck. And in here, uh, instead of like a 10 10 10 10 spread, an even spread across the uh, deck, I actually remove, at the very minimum, removed one of each color and then replace them with greens, so you have some level of consistency around having the color that you need to actually play the game, as especially as a single faction. um, which works. It actually works a lot better. At least have a higher chance of getting the herb that of your color. Because if it is, if you're only doing it with one color, there's the game is simplified to just how much do you have right now. And I don't think that's very interesting, and kind of like there's no point in having, like recipes and whatnot, because if they're going to be one color, then and you got your herb deck to be one color, there's no decisions to make here. You're going to automatically da 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 da, and there's no power levels when it comes to the recipes, which makes the game kind of pointless and void, and whatever. Um, so so it's like, I do really want to keep, all the herbs in there, because that just kind of brings the flavor of it. And so I, but then that becomes a problem in a sense where, cross faction, you're constantly getting all the colors, so you essentially are able to get everything you need to build a deck that is from any card from any faction, because odds are you're going to get what you need for those cards. And when it comes to the idea of their factions having their own identities, there's even the point where I'm going to have like the factions be kind of pitted against each other. It's going to be like kind of like the opposites, and they are the ones that, if they had access to the others' cards, they would be crazy overpowered and too easy to, run. And who knows, this might be this could very potentially be a thing down the road. But I imagine with power creep, it's not going to be so bad once that starts getting introduced, because all the old cards might not just not be up to par anymore, anyways. Who knows? It's like, I with the way this game plays, it's really hard to tell how the power creep's going to go, considering there are no numbers in terms of combat and whatnot, and there's no scaling in that sense. So it's going to be very interesting. And I do have plans for more mechanics and potential mechanics and, card types to come out to, I guess, hopefully manage the idea of power creep. Okay, so now the problem is like, though I could essentially make sure, as a single faction, you're getting the right amount of herbs. Um, but as I said, the problem is now that you essentially still have access to every faction's cards, because you're going to have the energy in your pile. Um, And so I at least for the very beginning, need to find a way to potentially mitigate this problem. And what really sucks is that it may be if, unless someone, decides to throw a comment down in terms of how to potentially fix this. Right now, I'm going to have to potentially make, since the resource decks, the herb decks, kind of strict in what they are. You can only use, this pantry, as I would call it, because it will have this specific list of herbs that has to be in the deck. I imagine that this could change later down the line because one of the potential ideas will affect the cards that go in there. And in a way, kind of, and what the change would be in these is that, well, there would be, of course, the highest amount would be of the the characters, the contestants, faction color would be the highest, while the opposites that I mentioned earlier, the opposite faction maybe like 1, 2, or 3, but the it's not just your main color that increases in number, but kind of like allied factions, but their herbs are more readily accessible, and so you could do a level of cross faction but you're limited to potentially without risk get a pull from those factions that might not make the deck too ridiculous, but that's really hard to tell how that works without a bit of play testing and seeing if the idea will work. So right now I'm going down to the idea that you will have a very strict, herb deck, which I'm going to call the pantry. And the character could potentially, on the contestant, you'll have, uses X pantry for that. And so he's specifically tied, or maybe later down the line, maybe like with reprints, he'll probably potentially have accessible to this, and this pantry. And so at least at the very minimum, it could definitely go with a couple of sets that those pantries will be exclusively used, but still have some level of cross-faction play when it comes to, certain factions. You can't really branch out too much. Not without a level of risk. And your deck that you make in terms of what you play is still completely free, but the deck of the resource has to be quite limited, so you are not able to just get away with the problem of everyone has access to all the cards, so there's only really one deck everyone will play, and I gotta avoid that because that will never fly very well. And so I have to work on making sure that isn't a problem. And I guess in terms of what I'm explaining here, I think I am done on this topic right now. Considering I have not considered completely what in the future, what the cards, how future pantries might be potential. I can't really say much here. Not or also do I want to potentially reveal that if it's a possibility. But yeah, that is the current design philosophy in terms of how the resource decks will work. I guess one more thing before I go off. The one thing that this also presents a problem with the herb deck and pantry and whatnot is there's probably another level of potential cheating in a sense on that regard, because you can probably alter deck, and if no one's paying attention, you're using but I imagine things will get fishy if you're too lucky, whatnot. And also you have to carry 2 decks instead of 1, which would be ideal because you just want to carry 1 in terms of how, playing the game. Um, and yeah, I think that's all I have in terms of design philosophy on in the history of what I currently have in terms of how resources work and are introduced in terms of solving problems, the current problems I have right now. And I'm sure I'm probably going to run into a few more before I get something that is solid, if I even get there. That to be fair. Anyways, if you are interested in following along with what's going on with this game, subscribe so you can see any updates that are going on, and of course, comment. Any comments and suggestions and whatnot would be greatly appreciated as well. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again. Bye bye.